All right, I have 9 o'clock here, so we will go ahead and get started. Just as a reminder, this meeting is being recorded, so by joining and participating in this session, consent is being given to the recording, and please keep your cameras off per the NOAA Privacy Act statement. Today is July 1st on the Spokane side, Daniel here, and on the Seattle side, we have Brent. So let's go ahead and get into the fire weather matrix here. And I will start on the Eastern Washington and North Idaho side. Today we are looking at hot, dry, and unstable conditions both in Eastern Washington and North Idaho. But then the regime changes a little bit as we go into tomorrow, a little bit cooler, but we're looking at critical fire weather conditions and parts of Eastern Washington, mainly in Central Washington. And then in the morning, we're looking at a small chance, 5 to 15% chance of isolated thunderstorms in both Eastern Washington and North Idaho. And then as we get into Thursday, it still looks dry and breezy, especially in Central Washington. And then as we get into Independence Day, we're looking at a very small chance, 5 to 15% chance of thunderstorms in Southeast Washington and the Southern Idaho Panhandle. And then going into Saturday, those thunderstorm chances transition into Northeast Washington. And then after that, just green warming and drying trend as we get into next week. I will pass it off to Brent now.
Okay, so we still have another day of warm and dry on our side. Won't be easing off a little bit from yesterday, but the mountain valleys, the elevated valleys, could still see some pretty low RHs and warm temperatures. I know that yesterday, up around Hosamine, it was down to 15% and 13%. In that range, and also down like Hanabakosh and some of those others in the south. So lower than we're had in our forecasts, but we're going to see that easing off a little bit, but still in the 20% in some of the very driest areas. Certainly not widespread at all. It's just the really driest areas that see that. And then it continue to ease off as we get more onshore westerly flow, but it'll still be a little bit drier, particularly in the northern Cascade valleys. And then we moisten up and we turn green tomorrow and through, but we still are looking at a trend through the weekend that's going to bring back a little bit drier air to the mountains. That's all I have.
All right, thank you. And getting into problem of the week, its main concern is tomorrow for wind and low relative humidity, looking at critical fire weather conditions for a large portion of Central Washington. And the areas in red on this slide are in a fire weather watch tomorrow from 2 p.m. to 9 p.m. Looking at west winds 15 to 25 miles per hour in the red, gusting around 30 to 40 miles per hour. But then as we get east into Eastern Washington, we're looking at a little less wind, 10 to 20 miles per hour, gusting around 25 to 30 miles per hour. It's going to be very dry. Minimum relative humidity is around 11 to 19%, with pretty warm temperatures around 88 to 95 degrees. And just as a reminder, the morning of, tomorrow morning, still looking at a slight chance of dry lightning, with the best chances in Eastern Washington and North Idaho, but there's still a small chance that could overlap with those critical fire weather conditions a little bit later in the day. Tapping in on this dry thunderstorm potential a little closer here. The best chances, like I was saying before, are in Eastern Washington and North Idaho, like a 15% chance of lightning. But then as we shift west, the showers have a lower chance of impacting this area, but still looking at a 5 to 10% chance of lightning in central Washington there. And since these showers will be moving pretty quickly, the main hazard with them will be new fire starts and gusty outflow winds, like around 25 to 30 miles per hour in the morning hours. So that is that. As far as weather goes, just today looking at max temperatures in eastern Washington and North Idaho in the 90s to low hundreds. And then in western Washington, we're looking at anywhere from 70s to around 90, even some of those lower elevations in the valleys there on the west side. RHs today are going to be very dry in eastern Washington and North Idaho, generally around 11 to 20% or so in the lowlands, and in the mountains looking around like 20 to 30%. In western Washington, the RHs today look a bit higher, generally in the 40 to 60% range, but a little bit lower in those mountain valleys that are supposed to reach into the high 80s or so. And then looking at wind today, the main thing we're expecting is some breezy Cascade Gap winds for Wenatchee, Ellensburg, and Winthrop. Generally west, northwest, like 7 to 10 miles per hour, with occasional gusts up to 20 miles per hour, except the Kittitas Valley, a little bit gustier there, up to 30 miles per hour. And then looking at tomorrow's lightning threat, like I was saying before, best chances in eastern Washington and North Idaho, like 15% chance, but can't discount central Washington seeing some strikes, like 5 to 10% chance, like I was saying before. And then looking at the winds tomorrow, this is when we're expecting our critical fire weather conditions in central Washington, looking at anywhere from 15 to 25 sustained, with gusts around 30 to 40 or so, and those will peak around 2 to 9 p.m., which is when we have our fire weather watch out. I think that's all I want to share for weather. And then looking at days 1 through 7, expected rainfall, we're not expecting a whole lot. In fact, the only measurable precipitation we may see is the showers that come through tomorrow morning. And then after that, it looks pretty darn dry. Not expecting anything measurable pretty much beyond tomorrow. Going to trends, I will start with Brent on the west side.
Okay, so you can see here, here's a Hosamine up in the North Cascades, and it's kind of representative of some of those elevated valleys in the mountains that are going to be dry one more time today, with minimum relative humidities into the 20s. And then back up to really fairly normal through the rest of the week. They're just towards the end of this trend period, we start seeing it dipping down again. So is some initial looks that they'll have another hot, dry period early next week. But after today, we're going to be doing pretty well with, even though we'll be getting into the 20s and 30s, or up into the 30% RHs, the recoveries will be good overnight. It's excellent. So that really will help as well. And no real big wind issues showing up in the forecast yet. And like Daniel was saying, we don't really see any precip for us either.
All right, thank you. And then covering Central Washington, looking at Douglas, Ross, our temperatures peak today and then they kind of slip going into tomorrow, but that's when we're looking at our peak winds and the critical fire weather conditions with temperatures in the high 80s, wind speeds 15 to 25 miles per hour out of the west, northwest, with RHs in the teens. But then as we get into Thursday, we're looking a bit cooler in the upper 70s to low 80s, but still breezy with like 14 to 18 mile per hour winds or so at Douglas. So definitely elevated conditions for Thursday. But then as we get into Friday and the weekend, still a little bit cooler but lighter winds, and RH is not as low as we were expecting tomorrow, but still in like the low 20s. And then we kind of warm up into next week as those temperatures get into the mid to upper 80s again, but light winds at least, so not expecting any elevated or critical fire weather conditions in central Washington. And then for North Idaho, kind of a similar story with those temperatures slipping into the late week here, but slowly climbing back into the mid 80s and high 80s by early next week. The winds here in North Idaho just expected to be the breeziest Wednesday, but beyond that, it looks like pretty light winds. So just elevated fire weather for tomorrow, Wednesday. So that is all for that. And then looking at the 8 to 14 day outlook, this is looking like it'll be a warm period. Looking at the numbers, 50 to 70% chance of leaning above normal temperatures, and for precipitation leaning near normal. But just as a reminder, this time of year, normal means very little precipitation. So yes, it's looking to be dry still going into mid-July. I think that is all I want to share. Brent, do you have anything else you want to mention?
Yeah, I think it's been covered pretty well.
All right, excellent. So just as a reminder, if you want additional fire weather info, you could go to weather.gov/OTX/fire dashboard. And so now I'm going to stop the recording and then